Okay, uh, today is a special show. We're talking about Break the Chains. I'd like to introduce Josephine Lee and Zijan Ming from Break the Chains Alliance. And welcome today.
Hello.
Hi, hello, Mike. Thank you for having us.
No problem. First, before we get into too much detail, I'd like to show at least part of a brief video that Zijan had done. Bear with me a second. I could play that whole thing, but I'll put a link to it below so people can actually go to it and view it themselves. Now, before we get into the discussion, as an old white guy, couldn't really appreciate what people of color or immigrants go through until I found my current wife, who is Peruvian, and Zijan knows her. And I can witness the things that she goes through when we do simple things like shopping. So would the two of you like to go in more detail about the video that we just saw?
So the video talk about how the government, right, has been responsible dividing the people, right? And like you can you have seen a lot of discrimination going on, a lot of like anti-immigrant sentiments going on. And a lot of people would attribute to the attitude, right? Saying, oh yeah, they discriminate against, they're being yelled at, or different things. But essentially, it's actually what the government has been trying to do to divide the working people, right? So that the undocumented workers have been subject to discrimination because of the government making them criminals, making them criminals to work. So that's what the video has been trying to explain from the Reagan time, where he implemented this part of the immigration reform is the employer sanctions that criminalize undocumented workers for working. So and he also gave power to the bosses to patrol these immigrants. Letting them check the immigration status of the workers as a way to threaten them, that they have to accept lower working conditions. So that way to pit the undocumented workers against the documented workers and citizens. So that's the way to really create this kind of division among people.
Josephine, you'd like to comment?
Yeah, so we both work with, both undocumented and documented workers. And what we hear a lot from people, and, I've witnessed myself, I used to work in a restaurant, is that usually employers, when you tell them that you are documented, actually employers would prefer to hire undocumented workers who they can pay less money, right? They don't have any recourse under the law. And then it ends up creating divisions among documented and undocumented workers. And so Break the Chains is trying to bridge this divide so that and expose how the employer sanctions law under the Immigration Reform and Control Act help to create these division and allows employers to super exploit undocumented workers.
Now, Zijan and I have worked on some projects locally, things like in a Women program where healthcare workers are being affected, and it seems to be that the undocumented people that are working in those positions, again, are being treated most poorly. With this campaign, how are you getting out to a media that really hasn't been representative of the people? They've been talking about broadcasting all of the things that we just saw in the video from the presidents and the government, but we're not talking from the people's point of view.
Yeah, actually, you'll see in the... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Josephine. Go ahead.
So you'll see in the media, actually in the New York Times and the Washington Post, they actually support strengthening employer sanctions. Their argument is that the country needs more slaves, that the undocumented workers do the work that Americans don't want to do. And by pushing this argument, it actually divides workers even more, because there's an assumption that immigrant workers, they want to be in this position. So actually the mainstream media says that while they support amnesty, they do not support the repeal of employer sanctions. And so a lot of even the mainstream media's perspectives are pretty divisive.
Mm-hmm. And Zijan, you were going to say something?
Yeah, because that's how in the U.S. How the ruling class trying to control the narrative, right? And you can see like the two party actually, even though they might seem to be taking different positions, but essentially they're the same to maintain the exploitation. So while Trump, pretty much, upfront about shifting the blame to undocumented workers, we have seen like in New York City, especially with like so-called progressive Mayor De Blasio, who bragged himself of protecting immigrants and fighting for sanctuary cities. But that in the end actually trying to maintain the same system, because now he's getting all the undocumented workers in and then try to force them to work in very bad working conditions. And he's also working with big developers to displace the communities. So in the end, when the undocumented workers come to New York City to try to find sanctuary, they actually end up being exploited as cheap labor to help help the system run. So in the end, even though De Blasio's rhetoric is sounds very benevolent, right? Oh yeah, I love immigrant, but like Josephine said earlier, right? They pretty much just want to have more slaves. So this kind of narrative are very popular in the mainstream, and the mainstream, of course, they try to paint it as like a difference between the parties. But then they wouldn't say, essentially, actually, these two parties are the same, in trying to maintain the super exploitation, of undocumented workers.
Yeah, I
And
mean, a lot of
well,
oh, go ahead.
yeah, and what Mike raised earlier about how we try to get the word out. We try to use organizing, of many forms, right? But essentially, what we try to do is to bring people together and see the common interest, let people recognize the common interest. Like for example, in our like what Mike you raised earlier, right, about the home attendants. Actually, a lot of home attendants are documented. So yeah, I mean many of them immigrants, but they are documented. There are also undocumented home attendants, as we know. But whether documented or not, they actually both forced to work 24 hours, 24-hour shifts. And also the wage stats, right? So yeah, like we said earlier, how the employers use the immigration status to threaten them. So a lot of wage stabs happen in immigrant communities, but this also happen in a lot of other communities too. But in order to solve the problem, that people should overcome the division, right, regardless of status, to come together. Like in New York State, we hold the Governor Cuomo accountable, for supporting the criminal bosses, for stealing workers' wages. So this call, we try to unify workers of different statuses and also let them see the common interest. So as a way to kind of break the division and break the kind of prejudice, discrimination, among the different groups, so that they can come together, see the common interest to really fight the system, kind of promote this division.
One of the things that I've always been thankful for is that I grew up in Brooklyn, in New York, and found it to be a very diverse place. Living in Texas, though, I know the Latin community has a large population, but what about the Asian community in Texas? I know it must be difficult at times in a conservative state like Texas.
Well, contrary to a lot of belief, actually Houston is pretty international. So there is a huge Asian population, and as well as many other ethnicities. But like we talked about before, it's still neighborhoods are very, very segregated. And so there's already divisions occurring by zoning laws, but then there's also a lot of African American and the Latino community live side by side in different communities, and with Chinese as well. And we even see divisions that are happening between those groups in apartments. And so, landlords renting out at a lower rate to a certain group than others. And And then the same in the workplace. A lot of different ethnicities work side by side, and the boss will usually use those divisions between ethnicities and between workers of different immigration status to divide them. And so that means like paying them different wages. We have one case where in the fast fashion industry, there's an intermediary groups, and they will send clothes to other developing countries. And in those workplaces, we just found out that the employer goes through a contracting agency to hire undocumented workers, pays them less, doesn't pay them, doesn't help to report their taxes. But then at the same time, he fired all the documented workers who were paid just slightly more so that he can super exploit the undocumented workers there. So this is pretty common across many different industries in Houston as well as around the nation.
Mm-hmm. Now, how large is the alliance? I mean, here you are in Texas, and John is here in New York. Are you in other cities across the country?
Yeah, so there's groups and individuals that are part of it in Oklahoma, in New Jersey, in Arkansas. So it extends, but it actually at one point it was much larger before Obama came into office. The Break the Chains Alliance actually started way before, and we were working together to repeal employer sanctions. But a lot of organizations and members pinned too much hope on Obama and Obama's promise to reform the immigration system. And of course, you know, we see that he essentially pushed a lot of the same policies that his predecessor Bush did, and actually even deported even more immigrants during his time. And so right now our task is to kind of get this out a little bit more again. And I think now it really is the time to do that.
Yes, Obama was a big disappointment to a large group of people. So are you planning demonstrations across the country, or are they individual groups doing those, or what's your approach to make this more public?
So I think we mainly use this as a platform to break it out and to different groups. And of course, the perspective itself, it's the main thing is to bring the people together, right? And then the employer sanction, to repeal employer sanction, and also the equal rights for all workers. The right, that includes the right to organize. So that way, of course, it fits into different contexts, right? And specific groups in different places can also, they have their own campaign, right? But then we use this to put out a perspective so that, in organizing their own campaign, they can also, bring it out this perspective, right? Organizing, bridging the gap, between the documented and undocumented workers. And we have seen like how it really affect, like, for example, in New York City, in the different campaigns that we do, like the anti-displacement, like the campaign I mentioned earlier, there's the push Cuomo to pass the SWEP bill. And also before we have cases where documented and undocumented workers work side by side. So usually the boss, of course, use the immigration status to try to pit them against each other. And because of the perspective, we try to do the other way, right? That they have the common interest, they should come together. And then so in smaller campaign, like in a single restaurant. That we are trying to do that, and also a larger community-wide campaign, also get people to recognize that. So because people like you said, at the beginning, right? They also led to blame their co-worker, right, or the other community member. For getting the resources, right, for stealing the job and all of that. But then not really come together to hold the one who's really responsible, for
Like I mentioned in a previous interview that I did earlier in the week, talking about my parents' tradition in mind, how immigrants, the Irish and the Italian immigrants, always fighting for the same jobs. Now today I see that happening, at least in New York, between Asians, blacks, and Hispanics fighting for basically whether it be housing or jobs. And we need to work on those groups to get them to join together. Now I know the Chinese Workers Group is a good organization plan to do that. So how do people get involved in the alliance?
Well, we're encouraging a lot of local organizing. Our website is equalrightsforallworkers.org. And, we're encouraging people to, start their own chapters in their own cities, in their communities, on their campus, and to connect with us in that way, and to spread materials through there. So on our website, equalrightsforallworkers.org, there's a lot of information, but it's really going to have to happen through a lot of local organizing efforts. And so, for example, right now, now is a great time because we see what's happening even now with the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, right, to the coronavirus pandemic, is that the response is revealing deep-seated inequalities that we have here in the US already. And so, this stimulus package that, is being debated right now in Congress, I believe it hasn't passed through the House yet, but it's allowing for, $500 billion of bailout money, right, to corporations, while American workers just get crumbs. And how is this allowed to happen? It's because the government has divided working people against each other. And so we see that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be excluded from any type of, from the stimulus package or any government response, right? We work with a lot of undocumented workers. They can't get any relief. They've been laid off the job, and they can't file for unemployment. And so this division is happening even in the response that we see to the coronavirus pandemic now.
Right, the people that need it most are the people that are least get least the benefits. But so, is there a training program for organizing that you can help local chapters get involved?
Yeah, I mean, we will work with, or we do work with people who want to start local chapters in different cities. And so they just have to contact us through our website, which is equalrightsforallworkers.org. And, we've gotten some calls from like Ohio and other places. But yeah, we'll work with people to start local chapters on their campus and their communities. It has to start local first, but that we unite around a common perspective to make sure that all workers do have equal rights to organize, because if not, then basically all of our conditions suffer.
I see that we've lost Zhan.
Yes.
I was hoping he'd be able to come back sooner, but. So I appreciate you taking the time, and I'll try to connect with Zhan later. But we'll put all of your information down below in the video, and we'll be back. This is a project I'd like to continue with, and we'll have some discussions from some other workers and see whether we can start to wake up some politicians to this.
Okay, just one last thing. If people do want to get involved, if they're in New York or Houston, I know that NMAS has a local effort. They are calling for a disaster relief fund that would go to all workers, regardless of their immigration status, And so you can find that petition on nmass.org. Okay, but then here locally in Houston, Texas, we also do have a petition calling for disaster relief fund for all workers, and that's at bit.ly / Texas COVID-19 Relief Fund. And so that's our local effort that's happening right now to push the government to be accountable to all workers, not just a few.
Okay, great. I'll make sure that goes in the box below as well. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time. And if you have my information, if you want to get back to me and you have something else that you'd like to discuss, let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mike, for having us.
Thank you
And
very
I'm
much.
sorry we lost Jishung.
Yeah, he'll be back.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
have a good day. All right. Bye.
You too. Okay, bye-bye.